Excellent. So, there we go. So welcome everybody. Welcome to today's webinar, Fibre for Fodmappers. So today we're looking at building better bowels in IBS. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Shani Ashkenazi. I'm the founding director of FodShop. I started FodShop in July 2018, and since then we've been able to build a leading IBS and low FODMAP online resource. I'm very, very humbled to be here today with Dr. Josephine Muir and Ellie Stoyanowska, two very well qualified and very knowledgeable experts in the IBS and gut health field. Ellie is Director of Dietetic Gut Clinic, and she is very, very passionate about helping patients with IBS manage their symptoms with a low FODMAP diet. Also humbled to be here with Joe. Joe is a CEO of Noisy Guts. You guys may have heard of the Superflora high fiber, high protein gut health shakes. So she'll go into a little bit more detail as we go. So without further ado, I'm very excited to present our first speaker of the day. We've got Ellie Stoyanowska, and Ellie will tell you a little bit more about her, but she is based in Perth and she is a private practice dietitian, and she has 3 locations that she practices in. So go for it, Ellie. Look forward to hearing from you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Shani, for a great little overview. So I'll get you to go on to the next slide, please. And thank you, everyone. And thank you for having me today as your guest expert dietitian speaker. So today I'll be covering aspects of fibre for FODMAPPers. And really the idea is to build better bowels with irritable bowel syndrome. Go next slide. So just a little bit more about me. As sort of Shani covered, I'm an expert gastrointestinal dietitian. My background is actually working clinically, so in a hospital setting, and then moving on to working in private practice, where I've been able to kind of provide that expert knowledge to really patients in the community. I'm a Monash sort of trained IBS dietitian, so obviously very experienced in managing irritable bowel syndrome and application of the low FODMAP diet. I'm a member of Celiac Society, as well as Dietitians Crohn's and Colitis Network. And we know particularly when it comes to FODMAP diet, this is very much applied in not just IBS, but also can be applied if you have, for example, Crohn's or ulcerative colitis, in managing those functional type of symptoms. I'm also the vice convener of the National Dietitians Australia Gastro Interest Group. If you'd like to reach out following this presentation, please do so either via email, which will be included at the end as well as obviously in this presentation, and obviously via our website. All right, let's get stuck into it. So what is fibre? So fibre is essentially a bit of an umbrella term that we use to describe different types of indigestible carbohydrates. And indigestible essentially means that they're not really broken down throughout the gut, but they make it down through, stomach, small intestine, and in the large bowel is where they get accessed by the beneficial microbiota or bacteria. There's so many different types of fibres, so many different ways that we can categorize and classify these. But as we sort of previously, we used to kind of refer to them mostly as, their level of solubility. So whether they essentially like dissolve in water, so soluble and insoluble fibre, which maybe some of you have heard of that concept, but more and more we are learning so much about them, and we are discovering that it's actually their functional characteristics that actually has that beneficial role in irritable bowel syndrome, because we can use those particular functions to exhibit a particular effect. So we sort of mostly want to incorporate fibres in the diet, one, to either promote regularity, and this is kind of normalizing the stool. So whether the bowel outputs, so say, for example, if your stool is loose or you are constipated, we can use particular types of fibres to manipulate this. We can use fibre, of course, for improving satiety. And this essentially means is that ability to feel full. And so when we have fibre in the diet, that helps to regulate this. fibre also has an important role in gas production through the process of fermentation. So when it goes in the large bowel, accessed by the bacteria in the large bowel, essentially that they get fermented, which produces gases, which actually are a byproduct of the fermentation process. And so by better understanding fibre and the functional characteristics, then we can actually apply these as therapy in managing, say, particular symptoms when it comes to irritable bowel syndrome. Next slide. Wonderful. All right. So when it comes to functional characteristics of fibre in the gut, there's really three main aspects that we focus on. And so no one fibre actually exhibits all three. That's probably the most important thing to say, but certain types of fibres promote certain aspects. So I'll go into a little bit more detail about that. So viscosity, this basically means the ability of particular types of fibre to thicken up in water and form more of like a gel-like consistency. So if you think of something such as psyllium husk, for example, it's got that high viscosity ability, which means that if you were to put it in water, it'll thicken up. So particularly even actually things like partially hydrolyzed guar gum, which is another type of gel-like forming fibre. Again, this can be applied in managing both constipation as well as like loose stools or diarrhea. Bulking. So bulking refers to the ability of a fibre to increase the stool output, so actually the bulk as such. And so this can be applied to normalise transit time. So if the bowels are going too fast or too slow, it can actually help to regulate this a bit more. By normalising the stool, then we can kind of either firm it up or soften it up to make obviously that laxation process a lot easier. The last component is fermentation, and this kind of refers to the rate of fermentation. So how quickly certain fibres get fermented in the large bowel and produce gases. There's certain types of fibres that will get fermented faster and ones that are actually very slow fermenting. So for example, when it comes to Fodmappers, they actually are fast fermenting fibres. And so what this basically means, when they go in the bowel, actually they get accessed quite quickly by the bacteria or microbiota, and essentially produce gases quite quickly. If we were to think of something like, again, psyllium husk, that's a type of a fibre that's slowly fermented. So actually we can use it to our benefit to incorporate, say, if we are looking to improve constipation, we know that when it gets to the large bowel, it's actually not going to get fermented, but in fact actually will help to regulate and normalise the bowels. And essentially less likely to induce symptoms. Whereas, for example, with Fodmappers, they'll get fermented quite quickly, and because of that, they produce gas, which in turn can actually increase symptoms. Obviously, if we've got that visceral hypersensitivity, so the sensitive tummy, which can obviously happen with irritable bowel syndrome, IBS, is obviously that can induce symptoms of abdominal pain or cramping or that distension and bloating. All right, next slide. Wonderful. All right, so this is actually a really handy little tool and a fantastic diagram that helps to sort of really understand the complexity of fibres and really where they fall in that concept that I sort of touched on. So the rate of fermentation, the viscosity, so ability to form a gel, and then the bulking, ability to obviously add bulk to stool. And so this is those functional and how they overlap. So if we were to look at, for example, something like wheat bran, we can see that from a fermentation point of view, it's moderately fermented. So it's going to get things going a bit from a fermentation perspective. From a viscosity point of view, it's low viscosity, so it's not really likely to form like a gel. But then when we look at from a bulking point of view, it's high, which means that, yes, it's actually going to help to produce, if you've got constipation, it probably will help to improve in keeping you more regular, but it will also increase gas because of that fermentation perspective. So we know probably wheat bran is not going to be the best one to go to when it comes to managing IBS. A better option might be something like psyllium husk, for example, particularly managing constipation, because it's one that there is huge amount of evidence, because we know that Although it's got moderate bulking, it's quite viscous, but also from a fermentation point of view, it's not going to get fermented. So it actually will keep you regular without inducing other symptoms. Okay, if your bowels are a bit, oh, sorry, we'll just go back. If the stool is a bit more sort of loose, then we can incorporate more of those viscous type of fibers that can actually help to firm up the stool, and that are ones that are kind of less really minimally fermented. So again, if we were to think of something such as partially hydrolyzed guar gum, we know that from a viscosity point of view, that kind of tends to thicken things up, and it can help to regulate the stools. All right, go next slide. Okay. So when it comes to fiber, the number one thing is actually looking at the baseline diet. There is often no point in adding supplemental fiber unless the baseline diet actually has the right type of balance of fibers. So anytime, for example, I see like an IBS patients, or if you were to come to my clinic, we'll have a look at your current diet and see how we can actually tweak things to align to make sure that we are working for that symptom control. So yes, we can be on the low FODMAP diet, but we often know with the low FODMAP diet, it can also be lower in fiber. So what we want to do is incorporate low FODMAP, high fiber foods in the diet to help to manage those symptoms. And then should we need, for example, supplemental fiber, then we can incorporate this as an adjunct therapy in managing those particular symptoms. Sometimes we might look at, for example, if the baseline diet is okay, we might look at fiber as a monotherapy, which means obviously you're just adding the fiber without changing the diet too much, but we're mostly actually looking at it as adjunct. So we use it in addition to making sure that the current diet is balanced in the right types of fibers. So when we look at, for example, grains, and if you are like on the elimination diet of the low FODMAP diet, we know that there are so many low FODMAP, high fiber foods that we can incorporate to increase the variety of different fibers that we know they're not going to get fermented, but actually they'll help to normalize the stool. So incorporating, for example, if I were to look at grains, things like brown rice, quinoa, oats, all of those are really, really beneficial and super handy to actually making a massive difference in your bowels. Fruits and veggies, again, these are additional ones that we can incorporate, when it comes to fruit, particularly low FODMAP fruit, such as like kiwi fruit. It's fantastic for actually regulating the bowels, particularly when it comes to constipation. Nuts and seeds, again, choosing from the low FODMAP options. So obviously, not so much pistachios or cashews, but perhaps, including additional ones like almonds or macadamia within your current diet, just to make sure we're getting that diverse sort of mixture of different types of fibers that are still low FODMAP, for example. Beans and legumes, again, you can still incorporate this if you're on the low FODMAP diet. You just stick to the serve size. So say, for example, if it's chickpeas, making sure it's sort of no more than the quarter of the cup, and you can always double rinse them to make sure, obviously, you're leaching out some of the additional FODMAPs. So there's ways that you can make sure that we can kind of really up the dietary fiber that's coming in, and then see how obviously the bowels go and symptoms goes. If we need something a bit more, then that's where we can use fiber supplements to really sort of optimize things in the diet. Go next slide. All right, so just to build on that, so really the main sort of reason why we sort of want to make sure that the baseline diet has a lot of fiber in it is, the right types of fibers, is because we don't want to neglect the gut microbiome. So we know, particularly if you stay on the low FODMAP diet for too long, that can in fact negatively affect the gut microbiome, because we know FODMAPs are prebiotics, so they help to feed the good bacteria in the large bowel. But in saying that, obviously they promote fermentation, which can exacerbate symptoms. So what we actually want to do is, particularly when it comes to the low FODMAP diet, do sort of the elimination component only for that set time, so 2 to 6 weeks, and then quickly move on to the challenges where we are able to identify your individual intolerance with each of those FODMAP subgroups and really optimize that variety. Because we know the more diverse the diet, the better the gut microbiome, and that helps to shift to make sure we are promoting a really healthy gut. Otherwise, what can happen is over time, really it can negatively affect the microbiome and the type of microbes that live in it if we are on a restricted diet for too long that's, for example, also low in fiber. So which is why we kind of just want to make sure elimination, then moving on to the next stage, and then long-term focusing on gut health and optimizing things whilst making sure we've got good symptom control. Next slide, please. So just building onto that, so particularly when it comes to the mechanism of the beneficial effects of, fiber, and sort of increasing different types of fibers will obviously favor different effects. So particularly FODMAPs, yes, obviously if we have them, they're going to promote symptoms such as they'll promote fermentation in the bowel, which then obviously can exacerbate symptoms. So we just want to make sure we find that right balance between incorporating ones that we know you can tolerate, and only leaving out those which, for example, you have identified to be your individual intolerances. When it comes to prebiotics, there are also things that we can incorporate in the diet to have that other benefit. So things such as resistant starch is super beneficial when it comes to sort of in IBS. You can still incorporate it in small amounts in the diet without inducing symptoms. So resistant starch can be naturally found in foods. So say, for example, things like resistant starch 2 in green bananas. So if you were to incorporate like a firm banana, it doesn't have to be green, but more the firm one without the spots, you can actually have that added benefit to the gut microbiome. And so by incorporating some of these prebiotics, essentially this is kind of that diagram represents the process, but when we sort of have them in the diet, when they go in the large bowel, there is that small amount of sort of fermentation, depending obviously which ones we incorporate, and as a result the byproducts that they really generate is short chain fatty acids. And short chain fatty acids are basically almost the fuel for the lining of the bowel. And so things such as butyrate, acetate, and propionate, so they're kind of the main three. Butyrate in particular has huge amount of evidence to show its ability to actually really modulate the environment in the bowel. So it helps to reduce the pH, which is like the acidity of the large bowel, which actually helps to promote and foster an environment that it's more health promoting rather than, say, disease promoting. So this is I hope that kind of captures the reason why we just want to make sure that we only sort of stay on the elimination diet for a certain time and then move on to the modified, where we are still getting that exposure of FODMAPs that we know we can tolerate, but only leave out those which we know obviously induce individual symptoms. Next slide. All right, so again, building on to that, so remember how I touched on those short chain fatty acids? So this little diagram, sorry, it's a little blurry, but essentially is a bit of a representation of the different types of fibers. Okay, so these can be obviously from diet as well as supplements. And when they get in the large bowel, the type of short chain fatty acids they produce. Okay, so remember how I mentioned butyrate, particularly important when it comes to that bowel health. All of those are important, but butyrate in particular, there's huge amount of evidence for its benefit. So we can see which fibers have the greatest amount of production of butyrate. So fructans, FODMAP. But if you've gone through the challenge, each of those challenges, and you've been able to tolerate even the small dose, by getting a small amount in the diet, you'll be able to have that added benefit in the production of those short chain fatty acids. If, for example, you found particularly fructans were one of your key triggers, then there are other sources that you can actually incorporate to yield that higher butyrate amount. So remember resistant starch. So this can be obviously found, like I mentioned, in those firm bananas. Oats as well is another form of resistant starch. Often the way food has been prepared. So like if you have pasta, or even if it's gluten-free pasta or rice, if you cook it the night before, or potatoes, and you sort of have it the next day, the process of sort of heating and then cooling helps to generate that resistant starch, which is so beneficial. So that's simple strategies that you can incorporate in your diet to have that flow-on positive effect in the bowel. We'll go to the next slide. Wonderful. So this particular sort of slide covers some of the different fibers that are out in the market that we potentially can use to sort of incorporate in addition to the low FODMAP diet. So sun fiber or partially hydrolyzed guar gum, like I sort of mentioned. So if this is particularly, there is evidence more and more coming out in the management of stools that are maybe a bit more looser, so we can incorporate this one to have that added benefit. Superflora, another really fantastic product. So this is a dual sort of protein, fiber, and I think there's also probiotics in there as well. So it's a great mixture of different types of fibers. And remember, we said it's the mixture of fibers that play a really important role. So that's a really great product, comes in different flavors as well. K fiber, that's a sugarcane fiber, evidence sort of more and more coming out around management of constipation, but also microbiome support. Psyllium husk, probably the biggest evidence in the management of constipation. And the key thing with psyllium husk is actually getting the right amount in the diet. So then that way you've got the added benefit. All right, we'll go to the next slide. All right, so this kind of we're coming sort of close towards my end of the presentation, but I just wanted to share with you all that here at the Dietetic Gut Clinic, we've got our IBS to gut health program. So this is a really sort of comprehensive program designed by me, and it involves specialized IBS content to really optimize symptom control whilst making sure we are supercharging your gut. And really the idea is to go through all the stages. 1, have symptom control. 2, know your individual triggers. And 3, really optimize that gut health. So whether your goal is to improve your overall health, improve symptoms, or say improve a particular condition, we can do that through our program. So if you're interested in that, let me know, and I can share with you the details. The next slide. Wonderful. So thank you, everyone. So really, I hope today I've been able to share with you guys just the complexity of fibers, but also highlighting how important it is, for example, to work with an expert dietitian and a clinician to make sure that, you know, the right types of fibers are incorporated in the diet for symptom control. And really, we want to focus on that longevity long-term as well. And there's a cute little gut picture on the side just demonstrating the process of digestion throughout as well. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Ellie. That was fantastic. I haven't had an overview like that for a very long time personally, and I'm sure for all of our wonderful listeners, you know, that would have really been a very enriching process to understand the complexities of the different types of fibers that there are. You've got fermentable, bulking, non-bulking. It is quite a complex topic. I think you broke that down very, very, very nicely into bite-sized pieces. So thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Did anyone have any questions for Ellie just before we move on to our next part of the presentation? Feel free to pop them in our chat box here on the left. Otherwise, as Joe's mentioned, feel free to continue to pop them throughout the presentation. We'll address them right at the end. Alrighty, so this is a little description about myself. Rather than reading off what's there, I'll just give everyone a bit of an overview about me. Yes, so I guess my background is in clinical dietetics, but I've moved away from that now and gone more into the commercial side of IBS nutrition and low FODMAP certified products, and making them available across Australia and hopefully worldwide as well. So that's a little bit about me. I'm the director of Fod Shop, and I guess, a very busy person, but a very passionate person, a very passionate health advocate. And I really do strongly believe in equitable and accessible health for all, particularly where we start off with gut health as the very, very critical component of overall health. So let me jump straight in. So I always like to start off a presentation with a little bit of, I wouldn't say fun, but something a little bit more relatable. So I think it was last week on Tuesday, the 1st of November, Magda's big national health check aired on ABC's iView. And I'm sure everybody recognises Magda. If you don't, she's Sharon in Kath and Kim, and she's appeared in many, many different TV shows and interviews and all sorts of things. The thing I really like about what she's doing with this particular exercise is she's leveraging her recognition for a very important cause. So she's using the fact that everybody knows and loves her to promote something very important. So it's a bit more of a serious Magda. I'm actually quite interested to see how this series unfolds after the first episode. Magda's first and main message in her first episode of this was that Australians are actually at risk of a lot of different health conditions, mainly due to our environment. And if we boil down to it further, our environment meaning our diet and how we have access to a safe, healthy food supply, which could be determined based on our postcode and various other factors. But one of the main messages that Magda was talking about was that Australians just are not eating enough veggies. And, you know, you might be asking, why veggies? Why do veggies matter? Well, I'll be going into that in a little bit more detail shortly. But what she's mentioned is that Australians are actually consuming less than 10% of our national target of vegetables, which is 5 serves per day. And as we know, fruit, vegetable and whole grain intake, mainly vegetables, associated with many health outcomes. And vegetables are actually very high in fibre. So this comes back to our whole notion of fibre being important, not just for IBS symptom management, but for overall health as well. So we're looking at our blood sugar levels, we're looking at blood pressure, we're looking at our body weight, our satiety. So there are so many different factors involved in getting enough fibre. And one of the most important ways to get fibre is by maxing out on our vegetable intake. So it's actually quite worrying that we're not quite meeting our national health target. So that can all change with you guys today. Just to give you more of a context about what fibre, you know, how much fibre should we be striving for and how do we reach this target. So if we look at our little pie chart here on the right, we've got the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating. And you can see here in the middle of the slide that women and men have different fibre targets. So women should be having about 25 grams of fibre per day and men should be having 30 grams of fibre per day. If we zoom in on our pie chart a little bit more, we can actually see that the 3 blue arrows pointing here to veggies, fruits and whole grains constitute 2/3 of that entire pie chart. So 2/3 of what we're eating every single day really has to be high in fibre in order to keep our bowels, our cholesterol, our body weight, everything within check. So this is quite an ambitious target. If we're looking at increasing our fibre intake, we can already see that 1/3 of the entire pie chart, again, if we break it down, is just veggies. So if we're trying to understand how do we get our head around what a serve of low FODMAP vegetables are if we're already following a low FODMAP diet, we've already got these layers of complexity around serving sizes. You know, what's an acceptable low FODMAP serving size of a veggie? Does that fall within my target? So if I'm looking at what a serve of veggie is, we're looking at 1 carrot, we're looking at 1/3 of a cup of red capsicum, or we're looking at 1/3 of a cup of broccoli. And again, if we look at almonds and chickpeas, technically they fall back into our protein group. That's the dark blue in the bottom left there. I've just, for the intents and purposes of the presentation, put them into the vegetable group because they are still a very important source of fibre. So as Elle mentioned earlier, with chickpeas, you can rinse them or double rinse them, and that actually gets rid of a lot of the galacto-oligosaccharides naturally within the surrounding liquid in canned legumes. So the same goes for things like lentils, pulses, all that sort of thing. So that just sort of gives you an idea of what a serve of veggies looks like. You may not be eating 5 serves of veggies every day. I know for a fact that I'm personally nowhere near close. And I guess if myself as a, quite a health savvy, nutrition focused person is struggling to meet 5 serves of veggies every day, I can only imagine what everybody else is also struggling with. So one of the best ways to really keep an eye on our portion size, and especially if we're looking at, monitoring our symptoms for IBS, it's always a good idea to equip ourselves with a little resource like the Monash University Low FODMAP Diet app. We've got a traffic light system here which tells us what our low FODMAP serving sizes are, what our intermediately high low FODMAP serving sizes are, and what our red serving sizes are. So there's going to be a few different levels of FODMAP safety per serve of vegetables. So for example, if we look at broccoli, if we start going to that half a cup above, we tend to be going into the high FODMAP zone. So if we're able to work with an accredited practicing dietitian such as Ellie, or anybody that's local to you who can just work with you to find out what your safe serving size threshold is, while optimizing your fiber and helping you really meet that national target of 3 to 5 serves of veggies per day, it would be really, really useful. So I guess from a dietary perspective, veggies are extremely important, and as Ellie mentioned earlier, if and when you do need supplemental fibre, and very often we do find with patients that are referred to us from gastroenterologists and dietitians, when patients are struggling to get enough fibre into their diet, there are, I guess, some that are more beneficial than others when it comes to IBS symptoms and preventing those from getting worse or preventing them in the first place. So psyllium husk is a great one that Ellie mentioned. It is very well researched. It's intermediately fermentable. So if we go back to Elle's chart earlier in the presentation, let me just find that very quickly. I think that was this one here. Ellie, can you confirm for me just quickly where on your chart psyllium husk falls for us?
Yeah, so if you have a look at it's at the bottom, so from a bulking point of view, it's low, it's viscous, it's moderate, so you can obviously firm up the stools, and then obviously from a fermentation point of view, it's minimal.
Fantastic. Well, there you go. It's a very safe and efficacious fibre that you can use in your IBS symptom management regime, and of course working with an accredited practicing dietitian to find out the dosing and the timing that is correct for you. And of course, as Ellie mentioned as well, you've got partially hydrolyzed guar gum, so that's a viscous soluble fibre with gel forming properties. So it's very effective in symptom relief and tends to be quite well tolerated, particularly in IBS constipation predominant patients. So as I mentioned, there's sun fibre there on the left, and there are also other types of partially hydrolyzed guar gum fibre supplements that you can add to the mix as well if your dietitian or doctor has recommended some supplementary fibre. So the benefits of PHGG or sun fibre is that one serve, which is equivalent to 6 grams, is also equivalent to 20 to 25% of your daily fibre target. So meeting quite a lot of your fibre requirement to help top you up if you're not quite getting there with your diet alone. Again, you've got, increased good cholesterol and a reduction in bad cholesterol as a result of increasing your soluble fibre intake. It's great for your good gut bacteria, reduces your glycemic index as well. So for those who have got quite high blood sugar levels or entering that pre-diabetes to diabetic range, obviously talking to your GP and your doctor about managing that. But there are some studies showing that the Sun Fibre brand can actually reduce the glycemic index as well of a meal, even the glycemic load of a meal. So it can be quite good from a satiety perspective as well. There's also another product called Regular Girl, which is essentially PHGG sun fibre, but it has the addition of Bifidobacterium lactis, which is quite a specific Bifidobacterium strain of probiotic. And the reason why I think this one's quite a good one to mention is that IBS patients tend to show that their microbiome is lower in Bifidobacteria and Lactobacillus. So being able to replete or to put some probiotics back into your regime can actually be quite useful. Then again, there's quite a lot of complexity around this because there are many different bacterial strains and they may not all be relevant or specifically targeted to IBS and IBS type symptoms. So we're really wanting to consult our gastroenterologist or accredited practicing dietitian to make sure the right probiotic is matched to us. So if you go into a chemist warehouse or anywhere, just taking a broad spectrum probiotics probably not going to hit the nail on the head. You do want something that's going to give you the outcomes that you need for better gut health and for IBS symptom management as a whole. We've had some dietitian feedback about sun fibre. I'm not going to go too much into testimonials. That's something obviously we can look at in our own time. It's, I guess, quite a safe and well-tolerated fibre, etc. And we've had dietitians from interstate and locally as well who tend to be quite confident in recommending it. If you are wanting to get some further information about sun fibre and some of the clinical trials that it's been used in, particularly randomised controlled clinical trials, the original sun fibre brand by the parent company Tayo International has been able to measure outcome measures of the use of sun fibre in IBS constipation predominant patients, and we've actually seen that there's a prebiotic effect of sun fibre. Again, as Ellie mentioned earlier about the production of short-chain fatty acids and butyrate, sun fibre's been shown to stimulate the good gut bacteria living in the gut to produce those gases, which is fantastic, of course, for the gut lining and also for our immune health. There's also a little bit of evidence that sun fibre can also optimize the absorption of various minerals and vitamins from food that we eat. So, for example, magnesium, calcium, etc. So if you're a female or a male taking an iron supplement, it's actually a good idea to take sun fibre around the same time that you are administering your iron supplement. That way you get maximal absorption of the iron with the help of sun fibre. So essentially your minerals and vitamins become a little bit more bioavailable with when you co-administer sun fibre with those vitamins and minerals. So I find that quite fascinating. And I think there is one study showing that female athletes, when they take iron and sun fibre with it, it tends to increase the bioavailability of that iron. And of course, there'll be more on the sun fibre research website there. I really do encourage you guys to have a look at that if you're interested. K-fibre, as Ellie mentioned, research is starting to come out about this one as well for constipation in IBS patients. It's a general prebiotic fibre. You can take and easily incorporate into your meals and snacks. It would be good to include some into your baking. It's got a lot of maintenance digestive health benefits, so helps with things like laxation and is a really good way to get those gut bugs nourished. And I've just sort of finished off a little bit here with some little easy fibre fortified recipe ideas. So muffins are a great one, or even cakes, English muffins. So if you wanted to spread your muffin with some peanut butter or something, or mashed banana, you can very easily incorporate your sun fibre into that because it's colourless, odourless and grit-free, so you wouldn't even know. So if you're sneaking it into your spouse's breakfast, they wouldn't even know it's in there. And you can also do something like a scrambled tofu or scrambled eggs. Works perfectly. And another thing is that sun fibre is actually acid and heat resistant, so it doesn't matter how high the temperature is or if it's a very acidic meal with tomatoes or whatnot. Yeah, sun fibre is like the magic dust. It's completely resistant to all of those environmental stressors out there. So I guess, yeah, that's everything from me. Does anybody have any questions about anything that I've said so far? I can already see actually that we've got Elizabeth. Hello, Elizabeth. Thank you for your comment there. Elizabeth has said, I have problems with using prebiotics. Psyllium husk was okay for a while, but having Surgeon's syndrome and Crohn's and diverticulitis, I'm worried that I'm not having enough. I have 2 kiwis with skin on every day. Ellie, I'm thinking maybe you'd be a good to respond to Elizabeth's query.
Yeah, of course. Did we want to leave the questions till the end? I'm just conscious of Joe's presentation as well.
100%. Yep, we can come back to that one right at the end. Let's go for it. All righty. So we have the lovely Jo Muir. Welcome. Would you like me to give our audience just a readout of what's on the screen about you, or did you want to explain a little bit about yourself?
I'm happy to do that, Shani, in the interest of time. I know we're likely to go over, so this is me. We might just go straight into it.
No problem.
Excellent. So thank you for joining us today. This is me and my co-founder, Mary Weberly. I've known Mary for about 5 years. We were both working for Nobel laureate Professor Barry Marshall. In fact, I was the Associate Director of his research centre at UWA, and that's where my passion for gut health really started. And the reason why we're so interested in irritable bowel syndrome is that I was managing Prof's gastro clinic at Sir Charles Garden Hospital, and we started seeing a huge number of IBS patients that were routinely coming in for colonoscopies, which really was very frustrating to have a wait list and have it clogged up by people with IBS coming in for colonoscopies, because in most cases it just told both the practitioner and the patient nothing new. So that's the reason my research team was so interested in IBS. Next slide, please, Shani. In addition to that, we were finding too that not only was this really prevalent, but as research scientists, we're always fascinated by problems where there are lots of unanswered questions. So why is it so difficult to diagnose IBS? Why does it take people with IBS so long to get a diagnosis? Why can't we have a one-size-fits-all treatment? Wouldn't that be fabulous? So there were lots of unanswered questions that we were naturally drawn to. And as it so turns out, I have irritable bowel syndrome, and that was really good for our team because it meant that every time we wanted to test something, and as we all know, Barry is very famous for testing on himself, and so our whole research team would come up with solutions and they would test on me as the guinea pig. So next slide, please, Shani. I thought I would just put some of the previous information into context by talking about some things about the gut. When I talk at corporate wellness events or women's health retreats, I often talk about the length of the gut. Did you know that your digestive tract is about 6.5 meters long? So this normally goes across the length of a room. And you can see how it could easily get tangled, these little intestines, and how seeds might get caught or little pockets might get caught, causing diverticulitis. Lots of sharp bends and twists. Transit times might vary. One of our very good friends, Michael Mosley, I met with him a number of times. You might have seen the TV episode where he swallows a pill camera, and we actually followed his gut motility all the way down. You don't have to go to those lengths. You could, in fact, just eat a quarter of a cup of corn kernels and test your transit time without putting that on live TV. Elle talked about the sheer volume and of the gut microbiome. What I find fascinating about the bacteria in our gut is that it's as individual as your fingerprint. So even where we have two identical twins, there'll be some species in one sibling that will be completely unique to them and won't be found in the other sibling. The other thing I find fascinating is we've got a new professor to Perth called Jeremy Nicholson. He's a prof from the UK, and he works in metabolic phenotyping. And what his work is doing is showing that they're like ants in the ecosystem, that some bacteria, some species live in our gut, they all have different roles. So some on the lining of the intestines do different things than those in the middle of the intestinal tubes. And also along the digestive tract, the 6.5 meters, there are different microbiome profiles throughout. It's not like there is just one profile, there are many. And as Elle and Shani have both mentioned, our probiotics need food, like any living thing. Our bacteria need species, they need food, and often that is in the form of fibre. So the next thing I wanted to talk about is poo. Now, I'm quite famous for my poo chart. My family love when I do poo charts because I get to eat lots of chocolate. So this is called the Bristol stool chart. You'll see that on the slide here. And it came from a hospital in Bristol in the UK as a way of clinicians talking about poo and just standardising that language. Now, some of our more mature customers or nurses perhaps use this language, whereas I guess we're a little uncomfortable in Australia about talking about poo, which is why I make it out of chocolate. So the Bristol Stool Index goes from small Maltesers, which can be quite hard. They can be hard to get out. This can often be straining, to number 2, which is like, Maltesers all stuck together. 3 looks like a picnic bar. It's pretty much the good form, but has a few lines and cracks along the way. I put little eyes on my little happy poop in the middle. Number 5, you can get fairly normal. There is still lots of structure, but we're starting to see fluffy edges. It can be a little bit soft. Now you can see my poor Yogo. It's going to run off the plate soon. It's getting a bit drippy, but this looks like your emoji for poop on your computer. Your poop shouldn't look like soft whippy. I don't know why we normalize our emoji poop. And number 7 at the end of our Bristol chart is just liquid, and there is no form to it, whatever, it's just liquid poop. So what we're trying to do with fibre, as Ellie has suggested, is try to bulk it up so we get a normal sausage style poop. There's no straining, it comes out fairly easily. It's fairly easy to wipe up and clean. There's no straining, which can often happen at this end, and there's no cramping, which can often happen at the other end. So my poo challenge for those who want to take home some homework is just to keep a record, perhaps a note on your phone or a bit of paper near the toilet, just to record your poop for a week, to see if you can notice any patterns. Are you normally a 1 or 2 up the kind of Malteser end, or are you seeing that your poop is softer and it looks like Mr. Whippy? How many of the days in the last week do you have a lovely, well-formed type 3 or type 4 poop? And what I notice with women is that often we don't look. Sometimes it's the only place that you get some quiet time when you shut the door of the toilet. But if you have younger children, you're most probably accompanied to the toilet as well. So sometimes we just don't take notice. But there's my challenge for you, is to just take notice for a week of where does your poop normally sit and what can we do in terms of fibre to modulate and moderate our poop. So next slide, please, Shani. So at Superflora, at Noisy Guts, we make a product called Superflora. It has many of the different types of fibres that have been spoken about today. So we use a lot of PHGG because there's really good evidence base around that. We use psyllium husk, and Ellie's talked about how that can bulk up our poop and has some viscosity, so it really thickens. We use chia seeds, we use linseeds. And so we want to make sure that if you're taking a fibre supplement, that it helps to, regulate our digestion, gives you normal poos. We find, and, as scientists, we want to make sure that there's good evidence base to that. And it does have a clinically validated probiotic in there called Bacillus coagulans. We like this one because of it's clinically validated and good for a lot of the IBS symptoms, bloating in particular, which is, and distension, which are two of the things that I suffer from a lot. So 3 things I love about Superflora, and I'm a daily convert, is I find it very filling, that combination of protein and fibre. So whether or not I'm having it with a low lactose free milk or macadamia milk, I find that it stops my mindless eating, which is a problem for me in the afternoons when I can make perhaps poor high FODMAP choices. I love the fibre in it because it just helps that digestive regularity and helps me poop more number 3s and 4s, less Maltesers. And I love the taste. So one of the things I wanted to avoid with Superflora is having a lot of artificial colours, flavours, additives. If you like caramel popcorn flavoured protein shakes, you won't like our shakes. We use Valrhona cocoa, we use 100% Aussie strawberries. So they're very natural flavours. And the next slide, thanks, Shani. I'll just end by saying if you're interested in science, then our website has a lot of blogs. One of the things that Mary and I love doing is translating complex medical research into takeaway bites and infographics so that you can get the takeaway practical strategies from science. So you'll find them at noisyguts.com. I would love to hear how you go with your poo challenge, with your homework. I always say to people, email me, let me know how you go, but don't send photos. Don't want to see that. And I'm really, we really welcome to get your feedback on Superflora as well. So that's me.
Thank you so much, Jo. Don't worry, you won't be getting any photos from me, but I would love to try and have a go at making my own chocolate poop models. I've never done it before, and I've seen it a little bit on social media, but that was just brilliant. I think that was definitely the best and most relevant show and tell I've ever had in a live situation. So that's fantastic. Thank you very much. And I guess now what we might do, and firstly before the what we might do part, thank you so much, Jo and Ellie, for that wonderful overview. I've actually learnt so much myself today. I really have, and I feel very privileged to be here to be able to do that with you. So now what we might do is pass over to our lovely audience. I can already see in our little chat on the side here. Just give me one moment. Back in and view our. I think a question came in that was a bit more relevant for you, Ellie, just about kiwi fruit. I'm not entirely sure what's happened. I can probably get back into my chat, into my screen sharing. There we go.
Yeah, so the question, I'll just in case you can't see it, so I have problems with using prebiotics. Psyllium husk was okay for a while. So that was the question.
Yes.
I think part of it, and as another question is coming a little bit later, is how do you know that you're having enough?
And wonderful, thank you. And I think if we really sort of try to break down that question is, are we aiming to, one, get more fibre, or are we really aiming to get some prebiotics in the diet? Because there's different ways that we can do it. So I suppose if we focus on getting enough fibre, it does depend on the type of condition you have. So generally speaking, a more of a higher fibre diet is what we aim for. But say if you were someone, you had stricture in Crohn's, so there was strictures in your gut, then we probably want to limit that excessive roughage, because we know that can it's not ideal, particularly when it comes to those strictures, as it can cause blockages, for example. So we can still incorporate different types, and I'd be starting as working with food, and then looking to build that up slowly. But it would just depend on what your baseline diet is and where your symptoms are at.
And then the next question, Elle, that you might want to also comment on from Shirley. I add 1 tablespoon, 15 ml psyllium husk to steel cut oats or buckwheat each morning. Ellie mentioned it's important to identify the correct amount of psyllium to use each day. What is the best way to identify the best amount?
Great question. So again, it depends with that current dose, what does your symptoms look like? Do you have a normal poop, which is that type 3 to 4. If you find it's still not a perfect poop, then we can actually probably titrate that up to maybe moving towards 21 grams a day, which is that ideal dose. But we know it does depend. It can vary from 7 grams a day all the way through to 30 grams of psyllium husk a day to have that benefit. So there's no one size fits all. It would depend on obviously where your symptoms are at, what your bowels are doing, and then obviously your background diet and the amount of fibre that comes into that.
Yeah, so Shirley, I would just add to that. So obviously we're looking for a 3 or 4 to kind of have that ideal bowel type. But as you might know, every time you try and suddenly increase your fibre, that can often have really painful effects. So if you're going to change your fibre, either the quantity or the different types of fibre, do it really slowly and with lots of water, so you don't get any side effects.
Excellent. Has anyone got any additional questions at all? Now is the time. Thanks, Joe, for your low FODMAP recipes link there on the Noisy Guts website. That's fantastic. Got one more. I appreciate the great overview. That's wonderful. Thank you, Shirley, on behalf of everybody.
Yes, yeah, I think it's great to talk about a range of different products. I know that there's nothing worse when you go into a pharmacy and you just see a whole bank of supplements. The other day I was looking for some magnesium, for example, and I often think, oh, as a poor consumer, how do you tell the difference? And we don't often talk about different products and the different roles they have. So I think that was really good, Shani. I think you did that really well.
Thank you very much, Joe. That I can actually very much relate to what you've just mentioned. I actually worked as a pharmacy assistant for about 6 years while I was, at uni and volunteering, and etc. And the main complaint we actually had from customers and people that would drop in and out, they would say, what's the difference between the Blackmore's Bio C and the Nature's Own C plus magnesium? Do I need magnesium with my vitamin C? And so you'd have to bring everybody back to basics and explain to them, what ailment are you trying to treat? Do you want something that is a slow release, or something that's going to, be great for you in powder form, is going to work immediately? So there's so many different aspects, and I think it's really good to have an evidence base behind why something works, and of course knowing what your options are. It's not just A or B. Yeah.
I just wanted to also add before we close that I have 2 of our gut loving diaries to give away today. So these ones can be used, particularly one if you want to do Joe's poop challenge to record your symptoms. So there's a little bristle stool chart within it that you can kind of rate your poop. But also, depending on where you are with the low FODMAP program, there's specialised sections where it allows you to challenge and reintroduce some of those FODMAPs. So 2 of these to give away. The only thing that you really essentially need to do is, if you are on social media, take a picture of today's presentation and tag myself, so Dietetic Gut Clinic, the noisy, sort of noisy guts, as well as FODMAP. And the first two, after the presentation, will essentially be announced as the winners.
That's great. So everyone get on your phones. Get on your phones and take advantage. That's a really great offer. Thank you, Ellie. I think food and symptom diaries are a crucial part of the journey, especially when just getting started, being able to really understand the cause and effect. So yeah, thank you very much for your offer. We've actually got one more question here from Elizabeth. I would love to lose a bit of weight. What is the powder that would help with this? Yeah.
So Elizabeth, we have a lot of people who use Superflora as a meal replacement. I guess if we talk about meal replacement shakes more generally, not talking about my product in particular, the things I would look for are a really good quality protein, because the protein will help fill you up. Something that has good fibre content, because it's that combination that will really keep those hunger pains away. I'd look for something that is low FODMAP, so it's not going to upset your stomach. We have so many gym junkies that love post-workout proteins, but then always complain that it makes their belly sore afterwards. So something that has low FODMAP ingredients, and something that doesn't have, you should be able to recognize all of the ingredients listed on the back of the pack. So if you're seeing numbers, colors, flavors, additives that you don't recognize, I would stay away from those as well. And sometimes there are sweeteners that we just haven't tested. We haven't tested yet for FODMAP, so we don't know if they're going to trigger your gut health symptoms or not. So if you don't recognize something, go and have a look at the Monash app just to make sure that everything is low FODMAP. And obviously, I wish there were an easy way to lose weight. That would be marvelous. But use a meal replacement shake as part of a well-balanced diet, along with some exercise.
Thank you. Thank you for answering that one, Jo. Anyone else have any comments or questions, or anything that we haven't addressed or any? Glad to hear that, Shirley. Thank you. Shirley said, I appreciate the great overview and also learning about the products available. That's great to hear. Thank you.
Great. Well, I think our work here is probably done. And I can tell you my family are getting very excited because they're now going to go and eat my poo tray.
After dinner, of course.
Of course.
Of course. Actually, thank you for reminding me. Just before everybody goes, I'd like to give everyone who has attended live today a special 10% off FOD shop, or anything that you're thinking of buying or that you like the look of, just to enter the word webinar at checkout in capital letters, all in one word, webinar, and that'll give you 10% off. Enjoy. Alrighty, I think maybe we'll wrap things up there. Unless anyone else has some final comments, we'll end our recording here. And thank you so very much, Ellie and Jo. I've had a really great time. I hope you guys have had a great time too. And if anyone has any further questions, all of our contact details are right here on this slide. So all of us are open and accessible to answering any questions, hearing any feedback that you might have. And until our next webinar, in good health. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.